Across human history, one thing has been more precious than anything else: life. For millennia, we pondered its origins, dedicated ourselves to preserving it, and then eventually struck out into the stars in search of it. We've become so obsessed with preserving life that we've recently discovered a way to avoid death in most cases. Despite this incredible scientific achievement, I'm worried where this development will lead us next. My name is Parker Terrell, and this is the plain truth. Let's start today's show with a simple question. What are you willing to die for? Sure, some of you are laughing at that notion right now, but it used to mean something. Before regen tech upended what was meant to die, knowing what someone was willing to put their life on the line for, whether bearing for principles, people, or even places they believe were worth the ultimate sacrifice, meant something. We've virtually eliminated martyrdom and all it used to mean, and the change it could inspire. Today, the power that our fragile mortality used to hold is all but gone. We now live in a time when dying to defend something means you regen safe and sound with maybe a few scars to show for it. There's no doubt that our newfound ability to delay death has changed how each and every one of us go about our lives. But don't think for a second that our government and corporate overlords haven't also adjusted their plans accordingly. If anything, they're giddy at the fact that we're now both disposable and reusable. Why else would they have pushed so far and hard to spread regen tech across the empire? Don't believe me? Well, look no further than Stanton, where once again, a system owned by some of the largest and most successful corporations to ever exist failed to defend itself from attacks. The hate-spewing terrorists known as Xenothreat had barely left the headlines when they recently struck again, which makes the attack's success all the worse, since you figure someone in the system would have learned from last time and, I don't know, maybe done something to prevent it from happening again. Instead, what we wound up with was a complete and total failure of system security. Thankfully for Stanton, a system run by megacorps who promised to uphold UEE-level security standards, the incursion triggered a system-wide CDF alert, instantly deputizing millions of regular people to come to its defense. Think about that for a second. 4 of the most successful and highest-earning corporatocracies of our era can't defend themselves despite having ruled Stanton long enough to know what it takes. I don't know what that says to you, but to me, that means it's not a priority. The cost simply isn't worth it to them. They've realized that providing proper defense is expensive, volatile, and unpredictable. All traits megacorps famously loathe. Now, if we look back, Crusader is at the core of what's going on here. Its security failings in the past have allowed this to happen, even famously forcing the Senate to get involved. But the situation is also an indictment against Hurston, ArcCorp, and Microtech for not finding a way to help, for putting their bottom lines before the security of the system they swore to keep safe for us all. Meanwhile, even though the UEE has the power of the military and the advocacy at its disposal, plus the legal authority to take necessary action in Stanton, when the system's security has been compromised, it can't or won't muster the forces necessary to stop these attacks. Honestly, I'm not sure which is worse. Either way, it clearly someone doesn't care. In fact, the UEE's probably happy it signed away all responsibilities to protect and secure the system. The entire situation got me thinking, why don't these pillars of the empire care? Why is the security in Stanton not worth it to any of them? I thought about it for a bit and then it finally hit. Why pay for security if you can get someone else to do it for free? If only there was some kind of public and private partnership that could deputize millions of qualified individuals in an instant and direct them to exactly where they're needed. Of course, I'm talking about the CDF, the Civilian Defense Force. An instant army of people like you and me that these 4 megacorps are using as a de facto security force in Stanton. Now, don't get me wrong, the CDF has done some good work all around the Empire, particularly in coordinating supplies following natural disasters. But Stanton's always been special, and this is no different. The CDF being deployed in Stanton is nothing short of corporate welfare on an epic scale. These are wildly successful companies, off-worlding their security cost and risk to us. That means that some CDF volunteer, and not one of those megacorps, is paying the insurance claim on a destroyed ship. That means using public funds to finance the CDF, which then in turn compensates the brave people who are actually out there fighting for Stanton. Not that those payments are underdeserved. It's simply a cost these companies, not the public, agreed to bear when they purchased their planet-wide fiefdoms. Ideally, the law overseeing the CDF would be amended to stop the corporate exploitation happening in Stanton. At the very least, the CDF should invoice megacorps the cost of services rendered on behalf of the people of the Empire. We all know invoices are not going to be flying around the system. That's because this goes much deeper. Much, much deeper. This goes beyond the government turning a blind eye to Stanton's megacorps exploitation of the CDF. I've been looking into this for a while now, and I believe it's all part of a plan that goes back years. And I'm not the only one to have noticed some strange coincidences. Like how the CDF was created right before the widespread release of regen tech. Somehow our government had the foresight to make dying for the Empire as easy as possible just before the concept of death got flipped on its head. Now, the trillion credit question is, did the government share this privileged information with the megacorps in Stanton so they could plan accordingly? Or are we to believe it was just luck when they got their access to free, undying army? We need to take a break. But when we return, Cecilia Larrabee will be joining us to see how far and just how deep this goes. She has uncovered evidence that has potentially ties Stanton megacorps to Amanda Zhang, the lawyer and pro-militia advocate who, along with ex-advocacy agent Bryce Balawa, is responsible for championing the CDF. Was the CDF really their idea, or did megacorp credits and influence really drive its creation? Plus, we'll dig into the murky financials of those megacorps to highlight some interesting accounting that bloated their security budgets to make it appear like they were addressing the issue. That and more with Cecilia Larrabee when we return with The Plain Truth. Right here after this. That was The Plain Truth, Civilian Defense Farce. So it's really interesting. Parker Terrell's character. I had another one with him. I'll put it in the cards at the end. That was basically an expose on megacorps. He's got a thing against the corporations that run Stanton. However, I gotta say, I think it's really interesting how they're trying to tie in lore with the technology of basically getting players out there to have some fun and not die, in the process, that like permanently die. And I gotta say, it's really cool whenever he gets involved. Obviously, he has a interesting take on things. Last time I did a video on him, it was about Hurston Dynamics, and he was not too thrilled with them and talking about the corruption within it, or at least his allegations of corruption. And then you have this video where I talk about the entirety of the system. And I believe this video came out, this article, this lore post by CIG's lore team in the comlink section was done before the Hurston one that was more recent. So I'm going through the back catalog and having some fun digging through these. But anyway, some interesting side notes, noting that the cost of this area, the relationship between CDF and the mega corporations, the fact the CDF has to really take the lead in a lot of cases because the UE Navy is, quote, spread so thin, end quote, in a lot of cases when you talk about lore, and the Empire's real lack of ability to defend itself without the help of pilots. This may sound a little egotistical, but I'm actually happy about that. I like the idea of players having a massive influence in the case of Vanduul invasions, or in this case, where you have Parker Terrell advocating for more defense by the corporations against pirate attacks, pirates that have Idrises running around. And hammerheads, herds of hammerheads. So bear that in mind. What he's talking about is he's saying that these megacorps should have their own literal navies that fly around that could rival that of the UE Navy, and be able to defend the system without our assistance, which is a little much. But once again, it's a valid viewpoint. Is there too much pressure on the civilian population of Stanton to risk their lives, in other words, have those long-term scars and mental anguish that happens after a regeneration? It's not a painless experience, especially once you have too many regenerations. Eventually, you do die. And by the way, if you're worried about your LTI, your 10-year insurance, or whatever you got, don't sweat it. The idea is that eventually you will die from, zillions and zillions of times you regenerate and quote die end quote, where your next of kin will get your stuff. So your character will eventually pass from just too many dang injuries, or just by your own choice, wanting to have a nice looking character again that's young, and not all beat up to all heck and back. You'll be able to transfer that to that character. And that could change again. They might turn around and say, oh, well, you can just go through a special process. You spend some credits and your character looks young again, without even having that little bit of fictional change. With all the talk of different types of upcoming events and possible pirate incursions, I'm sure again and again and again, this brings up some fun topics that just don't kind of get outdated. Even though this was published 10 months ago, this Plain Truth article, as a text-based thing by the CIG lore team, it is still valid just as much as today as it was published then. So really fun stuff. Please, more of this CIG lore. Please post more than once a week if possible. Crossroads is a fantastic article. I got to say, I want to recognize what credit is due when I'm reading this. Crossroads recently came out. Jeremy Malal really knocked it out of the park. Like some of that serialized fiction is going to be very welcome. As I understand it, I could be wrong, but as I understand it, he is new to the team, and he's doing some fantastic contributions already. So more power to everybody at the lore side, and hopefully we get more and more fleshed out of this world and verse that we live in. All right, that's going to do it for me. All y'all fly safe.